So we are pretty much live everywhere at this point, and we have a minute and a half to the intro.
Okay.
Can y'all hear me now?
Yep,
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay.
I can't find that guy's name that called in the gun charge, the illegal gun charge for him.
No, that shouldn't be too important. Just
It
when
just says
it was
a former truck driver, but it doesn't give his name. His last name's Chubb. But I can't remember his
I
first
didn't
name.
find anything like that.
I can't find his first name now. And
All right, bringing up the sound so I don't miss my cue. Got about 30.
I'm in to see you, see you, see you, see you.
The following program contains coarse language and adult themes. Listener discretion is advised.
So this girl's out back behind the bar. She's a good girl. She called a car. You got 3 motherfuckers and a big white van, 2 dumb friends and 1 mean man. Well, she'll fucking kill you. She wins every fight. She's gonna rock your shit by the end of the night. And the only advantage that a killer has is they think they have.
this little piggy went to market. This little piggy stayed home. This little piggy had roast beef. This little piggy had none. And this little piggy said, welcome all you friends and family and freaks to the KLRN radio family. Thank you for joining us for episode 3 of the Talk Murder to Me podcast. I'm one half of your hosting team, Daniel, a.k.a. Bump Stock Ken, a.k.a. the Viking Santa. And as always, sitting across from me is the other half of the host team, my better half, the lovely, the talented, the funny, and the sometimes terrifying Miss Laura, a.k.a. Bumpstock Barton.
I thought there was like a slight hesitation between funny and slightly terrifying there. But yes, I am Laura. I am Bumpstock Barbie. Tonight we do have episode 3. This is Robert William Picton, the Piggy Palace Butcher. And tonight I actually brought in one of my good friends, Zelda, because she's actually going to school for psychology and everything, and she will be graduating fairly soon. And then we've also got Rick, who is our always awesome producer. But yeah, this is episode 3.
Episode 3. It's going to be a pretty dark one, very twisted. It's a twisty, curly tale, maybe. It's like I said, it's the Piggy Palace Butcher, the pig farmer of Canada, British Columbia.
And the pig farmer killer.
The pig farmer killer, yeah. It's going to have some, depending on how far we go, it can be very, very graphic. There's going to be some harsh language. This one is rough. So, just be prepared, when you're listening. If you got little ones running around, you may want to usher them out. Or put you
go into a different room
put
or
your
something.
earbuds in or something. But anyway, so babe, like I said, it's pretty dark. So go ahead and talk murder to me.
Yeah. This one is rough. This is Robert Picton, and he actually, we're doing the story on him tonight because he was actually in the news recently because he just died. But he was born on October 26th of 1949. And yes, he is known as a pig farmer killer. But he was also, the other aliases and known nicknames that we have for him are the pig-headed killer. My personal favorite is Pork Chop Rob.
I like
And
that.
then just plain Willie, like I guess just for his middle name, he was just known as Willie.
Yeah.
But Pork Chop Rob is my absolute favorite
I
because
like that a
that
lot.
that does not sound terrifying. It does not inspire fear at all.
That'd be my wrestling name if I was a wrestler, I think.
His crime spree kind of dated from that we know of from about 1995 to 2001. He has been convicted of 6 murders, but only second degree, and we'll get into that later. But he has confessed to 49, and here in just a second, I'm going to get Rick to go ahead and play cut 3 for us because we actually have some audio, and the audio we're going to be using, I'm going to go ahead and tell you what is being said first off because it's not very clear. It's just a surveillance video from inside the prison because there was an undercover officer who posed as another inmate and was put in the same cell as Robert Pickton to try and elicit a confession from him, which he was able to do.
Yeah.
But this particular cut that we're going to play for you real quick, the undercover officer is talking to him and says, but on something like this, it's fucking worth it. I can make things disappear. And Pickton says, well, I was going to do one more, make it an even 50. The officer laughs, and Pickton then says, that's why I was sloppy. So you can go ahead and play cut 3 real quick. Yeah, he said, I wanted to make the big 50, the big 50. So he is confessing here to this person that he thinks is another inmate that he has killed 49 women, and his only regret that was he didn't make it an even 50.
Well, that audio, that's so
It's
poor.
so muddled, yeah.
That's why we wanted to read it out first.
And I'll do that with the other audio clips that we're going to share too.
Yeah.
So,
but it's they said it's a confession, but it actually wasn't ever a legal confession.
yeah, I don't think it ever made it into any kind of court record, really.
But they didn't actually need the confession with the evidence they do find. But yeah, there's a lot of people who, I won't say a lot, but there's a movement of people who say that that type of confession, the undercover work like that shouldn't be done.
Illegal.
Yeah, that it should be illegal, that it shouldn't be admissible in courts.
The cops shouldn't be able to deceive somebody and lie to them in order to elicit a confession.
And I can absolutely see their side of that too. I mean,
it's somewhat understandable. It really is.
I also see why the cops do it because they get, especially when they're working with people that turn out to be this evil. But I don't know. That's
didn't OJ write a book saying if I did it?
Yeah.
And that's how they got Ted Bundy to kind of confess. They kind of did the same tactics there.
I see that it seems like it's working, but my goodness, there's something about it that doesn't feel right.
It seems sneaky and underhanded. Yeah. It does.
But I digress. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
But yeah, we'll just kind of dive right into his background here. By all accounts for Pickton's childhood, he does have an older sister named Linda who was actually shipped off to Vancouver when they were younger, when they were children. Mm-hmm. So she never actually had to live life on the farm.
Yeah, the mom said that the farm wasn't a place for little girls.
Right.
So they shipped her off.
They sent her off. So
probably the best thing that could happen to her.
Yeah, Robert Pickton, the one who we're discussing, he is the middle child. He has a younger brother named David, and they were the two that were left on the farm. And again, by all accounts, they were raised by an abusive and overbearing mother, which is pretty typical of people like serial killers like this. The father was emotionally absent and had basically nothing to do with child rearing whatsoever. There were some accounts. There's very little known about his actual childhood, like no real facts. It's all like second, third, fourth hand accounts.
Well, there's a lot of it that he would tell us too. Once he was in
Yes,
prison,
and
he
yeah.
opened up and told a lot of stories.
But I say
Whether you can,
there's
how much of that you can believe from him, I don't know, but
right. I mean, we are talking about a sadistic murderer
who
so,
loved the spotlight.
Yes, they all tend to love that. But yeah, overbearing, abusive mother. She would actually send the boys to school after working early in the morning. She would
Mhm.
wake them up well before school to work on the farm, deal with the pigs, slaughter the pigs sometimes, and then send them to school like without even being able to shower. So it was reported that they physically stank
Mhm.
in school.
Yeah, and they actually nicknamed him Stinky Piggy. Is what the
Oh, did
bullies
they?
were calling
Yeah.
him. Yeah, the mom. Now that's not untypical. Well, it's
It's not atypical.
Yeah,
like,
I mean, on a
for a
farm,
farm.
that happens. You do get up, you do your choring before school, but the hygiene or lack thereof, that is not a normal.
And Picton actually was viscerally afraid of showers because he was never allowed to take a shower,
No,
only baths.
Only bathtubs because I don't. Yeah, the showers are banned.
Yeah.
Now, when Linda was living at home, she did take care of her hygiene. The mom, the parents, they actually did spend money on her, buying her dresses and things like that. She had a pretty decent social life at school until they finally moved her off the farm. And then David, he was more popular than Robert because he actually did. Again, he did try to keep his hygiene up, at least better than Robert did.
That, and I think he was a better student. He was more socially adept.
Yeah, he had more of a social life. He was a smarter.
Because Picton was always described as slow in school, and he actually dropped out early. He flunked second grade even.
Yeah.
And
He dropped out when he was 15.
it was later on, like in his teen years.
Yeah.
Yeah. There was actually a book called On the Farm by a man named Stevie Cameron. And again, this is only one of the more confirmed stories that I was ever able to find, but it was still kind of secondhand. But when Robert was just a little boy, like a child, apparently he would crawl into the carcasses of gutted hogs that they had killed on the farm just to hide from people who were angry with him for whatever reason. Like, that's what he would do. He would crawl into the bodies of these pigs that
Hollowed
they had
out.
slaughtered. And
Man,
that kind of behavior was what set him apart from other kids too, which is
Mhm.
why he was deemed like the weird kid. You know, he was just not very socially adept.
Yeah, he would. I mean, that was him. He was attributing safe places and kindness with death. I don't know that he even noticed or realized what he was doing, but
That's true. I mean, because they couldn't speak, they couldn't be mad at him.
Mhm.
That could be a paraphilia that started very early on in childhood.
yeah. Now, when he dropped out of school, I think it's important too. He dropped out of school to run the farm. That was his plan. He was being groomed to run the farm. And when he dropped out of school, he took an apprenticeship working as a butcher. That's where he learned the trade and the skill to butcher the animals. And the way they did it there in Canada at the time, it was a 7-year program that he had joined. And at the end of the 7 years, he would be considered a master butcher or whatever they was called. But he would be considered he could basically go anywhere he wanted to with a degree of sorts as a butcher after that. And his 6th year, he was there 6.5 years, so just a few months away, and he dropped out of that program as well and went back to the farm. But he learned all the skills, how to butcher, where to cut, how to drain the bodies. So he was very knowledgeable in that trade, which comes into play later.
Yeah, we think so anyway. But going back to the family life, there is a confirmed story that goes back to the mother, because I think the mother was the most influential person in his life at that time.
Mm.
So on October 16th of 1967, his younger brother David was driving his father's truck shortly after getting his driver's license, and he struck and killed a 14-year-old boy named Tim Barrett. Now, David panicked and went home and told his mother about this. So Louise Picton, that was the mother's name, she goes back to him to the scene of the accident, and Tim is injured, but he is still alive at this point by the time the mother gets there. And according to what I found out, according to the Toronto Star, Louise just ended up shoving Tim's body into the ditch on the side of the road. And that's not even the worst part of this, because an autopsy revealed that while the boy's injuries were severe, he had a fractured skull, subcranial hemorrhage, fractured dislocated pelvis, among other injuries. But those injuries, while they were bad, were not enough to kill them. Tim Barrett actually drowned in that ditch.
Mm-hmm.
Then David was sent off to a juvenile court and his records were sealed, so we don't really have any more information on that. But the coroner's inquest did not mandate for the police to investigate all of the inconsistencies from that night, and Louise, the mother, was never charged with anything.
Nope. And there's speculation as to why. Again, it's a lot of this story surrounding it is a bunch of speculation, but it's also logically makes sense when you start looking into it. But
yeah, and then
the Pinktons were actually pretty well off financially, even though they lived in squalor. There was their choice, but they had plenty of money, especially for the time.
They had the resources.
And she had the Picton, the mom and the dad both was very influential in the community. They spent a lot of money there. They propped up a lot of other businesses. They had the basically the biggest meat market in the area was them. So they had a lot of pull.
Yeah, and that's probably why a lot of this, the Picton name probably had a lot to do with why this, because now we're getting into the adult years. So Robert and his brother David actually owned the farm in Port Coquitlam in British Columbia in 1992. And it was meant to be a pig farm, but there actually weren't a whole lot of pigs on the property. But there apparently was a large boar that would roam the property with the dogs and other animals. And it reportedly would chase people and try to bite them.
Yeah, he used it as a guard dog. And that's another guard dog.
And Picton, this goes back to just his personality, and we hear this a lot with serial killers. He was described as fairly quiet and difficult to have a conversation with. So he was very much the loner type. But they started neglecting the farm, and here's where the title of this episode comes in, because they figured out another way to make money from the farm because they were not actually using it as a farm anymore. They formed a nonprofit charity called the Piggy Palace Good Times Society and registered it with the Canadian government in 1996.
Mm-hmm.
So the purpose of that charity, they said, was for organizing and operating special events, functions, shows, and dances. But it actually turned into just wild parties with prostitutes. And
the charity part was just a cover.
Yeah, they had converted one of the slaughterhouses to hold these events. And there were sometimes up to 2,000 people would be in attendance. And eventually it was connected with the Hells Angels because they started using that as one of like their meeting and gathering places, I guess.
What it was is the two boys all of them did, including the sister. The dad died in 78 and the mom died in 79. And everything, of course, was left to the three kids split up. So, of course, Linda, she takes her inheritance and she moves back to Vancouver. And then the two boys stay on to run the farm. Well, David didn't have as much interest in the farm part, so he started doing some other ventures. He had a construction company, not really, more of an excavating company where they would move dirt. You seen them with the when you go buy gravel and all that kind of stuff, the dump trucks, the excavators, the bobcats, things like that. He opened up a business like that. And later on, he also opened up a scrap yard, just a junkyard, basically. They thought they could sell, strip the cars, sell the parts, and then just crush them. So that was kind of David's thing. And Robert stayed on with the pig farm. And as the years went on, the pig farm just kept on further in decline. It started.
They were just never keeping it up.
Yeah, I think, one, it was too much for just him. And two, I don't think that was really his passion. And I think the reason the farm started falling down and going away was probably his mental state also kind of mirrored that.
I say it was very representative, probably, of it.
I think the decline probably matched the pace with his mental state. And they began realizing that, the pig farm is not the gold pot they thought it was going to be. So they started selling off portions of the land and making the farm smaller. And that's why, like they mentioned, the pig farm wasn't much of a farm by the 90s.
Yeah, there weren't many pigs on the property at that point anymore.
And by the 90s, it was very small compared to what it was before. Because the pig farm there was a multi-generational farm. It was big. And by this time, like I said, it had run down. They had other ventures going. David come up with the idea for the Piggy Palace. And that's where they started bringing in the Hells Angels, having these big, huge raves. The Hells Angels went into business with the brothers, stripping cars and doing that kind of stuff too. So they had a pretty close relationship with the Hells Angels too. So they weren't
disconnected from the criminal enterprises that used them.
Yeah, they was getting deeper and deeper into that world.
But this says, about this time, and Picton mostly only chose his victims from around the downtown east side area of Vancouver.
Mm-hmm.
He was already acquainted with the area because he used a rendering plant where he would discard animal waste and then would drive along a 10-block stretch down there that was called the, quote, low track. He would proposition prostitutes with money and drugs and drive them to his farm. And at the time that all these parties were going on, in March of 97, he actually had an altercation with a prostitute named Wendy Lynn Eistetter. She claimed that he handcuffed her and cut her several times, so she was only able to escape by stabbing him in return. But in January of 98, the charges against him were dropped because it was basically a he said, she said type of deal. But at that point, they banned the Pictons from throwing any more organized parties on the property, and their nonprofit charity status was canceled. But this is starting the time that women started to go to the farm and just never be seen again.
They still had some parties illegally, and they was always getting busted for noise complaints and stuff like that. So they just wasn't as big ravers as they used to be. They were still using the property. And
we can actually now, I'll get Rick to queue up cut 1 because this is where the jailhouse, quote unquote, interview with the undercover officer is happening with Picton, where the officer says, quote, I find the best way to fucking dispose of something is fucking take it to the ocean. Picton says, oh, really? The undercover officer says, well, fuck, you know what the fucking ocean does to things? There ain't much left. And Picton says, I did better than that. So you can go ahead and play cut 1.
Oh, really? You know what fucking ocean is? You know what?
Yeah, I did better than that. Like, there's some victims that we know were either strangled. There were some that we know were shot, but there's a lot that we actually don't know the details of their murders for, because allegedly sometimes he would use a wood chipper and then feed the remains to the pigs that were left on the farm. So, apparently, yes, he did have a better solution than the ocean.
He also, it's theorized that while all this was going on, even though his farm was much smaller, that he was making more trips to the rendering plant in Vancouver. And this plant was unsupervised. There was people who worked there, but the farmers in the area they didn't supervise them. They had free access to the equipment. So they would come and sign in. They would be told where to go, and they could take their own meat and stuff down and render it themselves with no supervision. So there's no proof what he put in there and rendered down. And the rendering process is what they use, the stuff they can't make into food. And
it's just the waste products.
Products. And that was made to be soap, lotions, wax for candles, all that kind of stuff. So
I say we'll go ahead and kind of skip forward to cut 2 because that ties in with this, because the officer has been told by Picton that he was using the rendering plant. The officer just kind of sits there and says, "Hey," and he says, "Yeah, rendering plant." The officer says, "Haha, no shit. That's got to be pretty fucking good, hey?" And Picton, who is in the video eating a meal at this time, just says, yeah, what, just, The officer says, "Can't be much fucking left." He said, "Oh no, only I was kind of sloppy at the end, getting too sloppy." The officer says, "Really?" He says, "They got me. Oh fuck, I'm getting too sloppy." So the undercover officer then says, "See, you got to fucking be meticulous." And basically tells him, like with the rendering plant, that's pretty good. You must be doing something right. And the undercover officer, in order to get the more out of him, calls it fucking beautiful. So we'll go ahead and play cut 2.
No shit. So fucking good. Too much fucking left. Really? See? Fucking God, fucking ridiculous. Fucking. I just remember, I got myself clean.
Yeah, it actually sounds creepier because it is so distorted, but yeah, we don't know the exact details of each individual murder like we did last time with like Jeffrey Dahmer or somebody like that, but he was actually arrested. A search warrant was issued to search the property for illegal firearms on February 6th of 2002. Both brothers were arrested, taken to the police station, and investigators then, after they started kind of searching the house and figuring out all this other stuff, they kind of piggybacked another separate warrant onto that for evidence of or related to the missing women cases. That was granted, and they did actually find a few items belonging to at least one of the missing women. So the following day, that would be February 7th, Picton is charged with firearm offenses, but there was not enough information at that time to charge him with murder, so he was released from custody. They did keep him under surveillance, though. So by the end of February, they had enough evidence, and he was arrested again on February 22nd. And this time he was charged with the first-degree murder for the deaths of victims Mona Wilson and Serena Abotsway. Just on April 2nd, they had 3 more murder charges added. And also in April, he was charged with murdering several more. September 20th, he received charges of more murders. And then 4 more charges were tacked onto all of this on October 3rd of 2002. So at this point, we're up to 15 murders that he's actually officially charged with. And at that time, he was considered one of the worst serial killers in Canadian history. But on May 26th of 2005, he's charged now with an additional 12 murders. So that brought his total up to 27. Now, his initial trial began on January 30th of 2006, where he pled not guilty. And it actually took almost a year to determine which evidence could be presented in court. And the judge dismissed one charge for a Jane Doe on March 22nd due to lack of evidence. So the technical, legal number of murders that he is held responsible for is 26 instead of the initial 27. then the judge decides to split the charges due to the nature and the size of the case into two groups. The first group was the original 6 murder charges, and the other with the remaining 20. And on December 9th, he was found not guilty of first-degree murder charges, but they did find him guilty of second-degree murder for the 6 victims. And he was then sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 25 years. Which now brings us up to why he's in the news again, why we're doing this episode. Because on May 19th of just this year, Picton, he was 74 at the time, he's attacked by another inmate, and the Correctional Service of Canada called it a, quote, major assault. A spokesperson even told CBC News that Picton was in an induced coma in critical condition. An unnamed source said that he had been speared in the head with a broken broom-like handle, and he just died on May 31st of this year. So now we're going to take a second and remember the loss of human life right here and acknowledge that, like, yes, this man died. So anyway, Zelda,
Yeah.
where do you land on, like, especially with his childhood, the psychological aspect of this?
I think it's definitely fascinating, because it definitely shows like how abuse can lead to, psychological trauma, but also, can lead to antisocial personality disorder and these various like kinds of mental health issues that he displayed, like the paraphilias and stuff like that, the lack of empathy. Whether you want to say he had psychopathy or not. I don't think he was ever formally diagnosed with anything like that, but it still
Nothing
shows.
that nothing that we found out. And psychopathy, I know you had mentioned earlier just on your personal page about how you don't like outdated terms, and you
Yes.
mentioned antisocial personality disorder, which psychopathy is an outdated term, but that's that banner, that mental illness that psychopathy falls under.
Is antisocial personality disorder correct?
Yeah.
And that's the interesting thing, is there's that huge link between, obviously it's tragic, but there is a link between abuse um and what it does to a person's mental state, what it does to their ability to feel empathy, that kind of thing. I In my psychology classes, I've learned that abuse, and in my research, I've learned that abuse can actually change the way the brain operates. It can
Yeah,
change, like,
especially when
um
done very early in childhood during the formative years. Like, your brain is still
exactly.
forming at this point.
Exactly, and that's why people end up with things like, a lot. It's a very controversial disorder, and obviously, Picton didn't have it, but an example is like DID. It's very controversial as a disorder because people are like, "Oh, you're faking it, whatever. You're not faking it." I personally think it's real, but my point in saying that is that you. It shows that the formative years, these early years, and even like into teenage years and stuff like that, are very important because you end up with these disorders that your brain is trying to cope and trying to heal itself in a way. And
So
I think that
by the time you're old enough that your brain can start forming memories, which is what, maybe about 3 years old, let's say at the earliest, and then into your teenage years, these are very, very key moments in a person's development. And
exactly, and
anything
it's
kind of like outside of the norm, I guess, can warp how that brain develops.
exactly, and that's the fascinating thing. Like the prefrontal cortex, if I'm not mistaken, deals with memory, mood. It deals with a lot of stuff in humans, and
Impulse
the
control is a big one.
impulse control, things
That's the
like that.
one, that's the part of the brain that does not finish developing. That's the last part of our brain to finish developing, and it does not end until about age 25.
Exactly. So you have somebody that's been abused, that's hiding in animals, that's unable to take a shower, that's unable to properly take care of himself, and is physically abused. All of these things, probably, or I'm pretty sure he was verbally abused as well. And you have this child going through these things, and his brain's not developing like it should, and it's trying to cope. As you talked about with um with the way that he viewed death and things like that. You and Daniel both talked about the way that he viewed death as sort of a comfort, as sort of
And
a
that's not confirmed. That's just our personal speculation on that. So I
well,
do need to
I
make
mean,
that clear that
yeah, let me
he views death
add
as
that
a
I
company.
also watched a video talking about that too. That's probably that linked that as well. So I do need to say y'all, or it's not confirmed, but basically what I'm saying is this length of death and that kind of thing, when you're dealing with these formative years and you're trying to find ways to cope, your brain is trying to find ways to cope, you turn to very dark things, and it's just it's fascinating, but it's horrifying because you see that, you know in the case of, I believe, his older sister Linda, if I heard you right, his older
Yeah.
sister Linda, she was shipped off the farm and that kind of thing, and she wasn't raised the way that they were, so she turned out in a lot better mental state. She didn't harm anybody, that kind of thing. So it really is a tragic, horrifying experiment into what abuse does to the brain and what it does to the way that we perceive others and that kind of thing.
Yeah, and again, like you said, we need to focus on, especially with our very young children, because if all they've ever known in life is some kind of darkness, is death, even on a farm, with compounded with the abuse and everything, they're going to find comfort wherever they can. And if all they ever know and see is darkness and death, and that's what they're going to find comfort in from then on.
Exactly. And that's the thing, like, that's why I highlighted the fact that he was most likely verbally abused as well, because we don't talk about a lot. We talk about physical abuse, we talk about, the neglect, things like that. We talk about those, and those are very real forms of abuse, don't misunderstand me. But I think things like verbal abuse are not as talked about, because and those can warp the brain just as much. I was reading some articles and stuff that it can affect like memory, it can affect like, it can affect different things, or verbal abuse can affect different things as well. So I mean, the fact that he went through all of that stuff, like, it you don't have sympathy for him, but you're like, it almost
There's a
makes
certain
too
amount
much
of
sense.
pity, even if not sympathy. There's a certain amount of pity.
I have to say,
Yes.
I do have one part of me that's got some sympathy for him. It's when he was 12 or 13, and he was talking about abuse and physical and is when you say abuse, people immediately think physical, but you're talking about verbal
Yeah.
abuse too. Well, psychological abuse and mental abuse is huge as well.
Yes.
And he had bought this calf with his own money.
Oh,
Went to
God,
the
yeah.
sales, the local sales, and bought a calf. And he loved this calf.
He was very attached to this baby cow.
This calf was going to be his friend, and he even stated multiple times in interviews as an adult when he's in prison, anytime it got mentioned, he would always bring this calf back up, that he loved this calf and he was going to have it for the rest of his life. And he come home one day, like I said, he was like 13, so it was before he left school. He come home from school one day and ran all around the area looking for his calf and couldn't find it. So he went to his father. And again, we don't hear a lot about the father other than he was
absent.
He was absent. And Robert actually said later on in other interviews that when he wasn't absent, he was very abusive. He would be physical abusive as well. But he went to his father and asked him, hey, have you seen my calf? I can't find it. And the father answered and said, well, it may have gotten out. And he says, so he's going to go look for it. And as he turned around and run off, his dad says, wait, go check in the barn. So he goes to look in the barn, and his dad had slaughtered his calf, and it was hung up like they do, bleeding out. And he had already started butchering it, just hanging there in the middle of the barn. And here's Robert opening up the door thinking he's going to find his calf, which he does, but not in the way, the worst way possible.
Yeah, I mean, his parents basically slaughtered the only thing that he actually cared about in his teenage years, and that is a huge deal psychologically.
And I was just about to talk about that, the fact that this is a comfort source for him. This is a source of, I can take care of this, I can love it, I can, that kind of thing, and then it's taken out from underneath them. So you know, he had a very warped, a very twisted mentality because of the things that happened to him, and it shows the impact that abuse can have on somebody.
Well, I think
Because
that too goes to show how something like that. I mean, he was actually attached. He formed an attachment, an emotional attachment to something, which, and I mean, he's not diagnosed with anything, but I say a psychopath. They're not really capable of making emotional attachments, but he did to this calf, and it was taken away from him in one of the most brutal ways you can imagine.
exactly. And so I think, thinking about it like that along those lines, you get to or you get to thinking, and you're like, well, this was taken from him, slaughtered in front of him, that kind of thing. So he's associating, his dad is basically teaching him a brutal, he's teaching him, how do I put it, like almost a twisted sort of circle of life. Like, you have something you love, it's taken from you, it dies, and
Yeah.
then so it's not surprising that he associated death with life, and life with death, like that.
That anything you care about is going to eventually die, so we're just going to kill it while it's young and everything. So he just kind of disconnected. He never formed an
Exactly.
emotional attachment after that. So it made these women just that much easier for him to view the same exact way as he did the hogs or the cattle or something like that. Like, they were not actually people to him anymore.
And something I find fascinating that I read about, and maybe this is unconfirmed, maybe y'all can dispute it or whatever, but the reason he chose the women that he chose, these prostitutes, these certain people, is that, or these certain women, is that because they, he knew that the police, I think, would overlook them and wouldn't look
Yeah,
at them the same way that you look at
100%.
somebody
I
like you
mean,
and me.
yeah, you see other serial killers like Gary Ridgway, the Green River Killer. They target prostitutes and everything because they know that, like, the police don't really pay that much attention to them. Like, there's no family members really pushing, like, hey, where's so and so? Like, I need you all to look into this. There's nobody missing them. Like, these typically are women that have ran away from a previous life, and they're resorting to prostitution as a last resort, and
Yeah.
it just makes them very, very easy targets for people like this.
And they're easy bait. You literally,
Yeah.
you don't have to hunt them. You just pull up and say, here's money, get in.
I mean, we know that he lured them. He got them in his car and everything down there on Low Track by offering drugs or money or both.
And he had the money.
Yeah.
Like that one girl you mentioned earlier, the one that he stabbed in 97, the one that got away.
Wendy Eistetter.
Yeah, she got away. And when she was, recanting the story and everything, she actually said that he offered her, what got her to go finally to get in the car and go with him, was he said, here's $100. And back then, $100 in that area, especially that area, because we're talking about $5 and $10 trips. And this guy was offering $100. So of course she was going to take it. And he had the money. Of course, he put the money back in his pocket because he killed him, but he had the money that he could flaunt around and dangle that bait. So it was easy pickings. I hate to say it because it sounds crude, but
no, but that's why these types of women are they're such easy targets for these people.
And
like that's why they're selected.
And like y'all was saying,
nobody will miss them.
Yeah, nobody's going to hunt for them either.
Yeah.
And what I find fascinating, and maybe you can correct me or whatever, because again, y'all are the experts here. There's a kind of mirroring animalistic treatment of these women that mirrors the way that he was raised, and with animals and things like that. The slaughtering
That's
of
like
them.
what I was saying. Like, when his beloved calf, was slaughtered, that I think that's when he stopped forming emotional attachments, because he realized, okay, well, everything that I love is going to die anyway. So,
so if I can basically take out these, take out what I can do it first, almost, kind of thing. And it's horrifying, because it all of this could have been avoided, I think. Number one, if you've been raised in a proper environment, and number two, if he hadn't been abused, I mean, it may not have been avoided, but you can't help but
Yeah.
wonder because of everything he went through, and then you compare it to like Linda, who is kind of the control, if you will, in this twisted experiment of, okay, what does abuse do to a child, and how does it, and that kind of thing. It's an experiment we could never in the psychological field we could never redo, obviously, for
I
ethical
say
reasons.
not
But like,
ethically or morally,
yeah,
no.
yeah, of course, and I was making sure that was heard and understood, but um. It at the same time, it is an experiment, kind of an experiment that can't be replicated into how does abuse mess with the child, how does neglect mess with the child, how does a lack of hygiene mess with the child, and
Yeah.
in his case, it turned him into this monster.
Yeah, I don't. Again, that brings up kind of a nature versus nurture argument, which I think is an entirely separate episode that we could do because I mean, there's so much that goes into that. But it's funny that you say like how this could have been prevented because the Vancouver police actually, since all of this, have said that they botched the entire
Yeah.
investigation. They actually had ample reasons and ways to investigate all of this and figure out from the very beginning what was happening on that farm.
But I think it goes back to, again, the women that he targeted. He knew these women weren't going to be treated the same way that maybe you and I, as as women, would be treated.
Yeah, absolutely.
With like a family that miss us, we have society, high place in society, rather, that kind of thing. So he chose victims in such a way that he knew they won't be missed, and it's kind of, again, it goes back to that sort of creepy mirroring of the way that his animals were treated, this calf was treated. Well, nobody's gonna miss it, and then it ends up getting slaughtered, and he's the only one that misses it. And then you have, these women that, okay, maybe one or two of their families might miss them, but you know what I'm saying? Like it's the parallels are, I mean, you can't help but look into that nature versus nurture argument and go, there was a lot of environmental influence.
Yeah, I think that nurture did play a heavy part in this, but since we are getting closer to like the top of the hour and everything, since we are talking about the victims here, we'll go ahead and get into the in memoriam because these women existed, they mattered, they belonged to somebody.
Yeah.
Even if their families thought that maybe they were already dead or didn't want to be found and that's why they didn't look for them, they lived, they mattered, and their lives were taken from them in a way that should never be taken from anybody. So we'll take the minute here. I'll go ahead and read off at least the known and the alleged victims. And I just want everybody to keep in mind that there are probably more victims out there that he never confessed to and that we never found out about. So,
well, this list that you're going to read are the 27 that was the trial was based upon, and that was in 2007.
And remember, he's confessed to 49 at least.
Yeah, he's claimed 49. There was
Jane Doe, at least.
Yeah, and there's a 27 that I went to trial for that they said that he absolutely did it. So those 27 confirmed. At the end of the cleanup in 2010, they said that there was remains and DNA remains of 33 women on that farm.
On the property, yeah. But
so these 27 is not a complete list as far as victims, but it's the only names we have.
So these are the names that we have, but just keep in mind there are probably more. So any Jane Does, just pray for their soul. Pray for their families that never got that closure, that never got that answer.
Yeah.
But
God knows them. So
yeah, God knows them. They're back home. But these are the ones that we do know. And in August of 2001, Serena Abotsway, she was 29. November 30th, 2001, there's Mona Lee Wilson. She was 26. June of 2001, Andrea Josberry. She was 22. April 25th of 2000, Brenda Ann Wolfe. She was 32. August of 1991, we have Mary Ann Clark, who also went by the name Nancy Greek. She was 25. December of 1995, there is Diana Melnick, and there's no age given for her. 1996, there is Cara Louise Ellis, who went by Nikki Trimble. She was 25. October of 1996, there's Tanya Holick. I can't pronounce that last name. I'm sorry. She was 23. 1997, Sherry Irving. She was 24. In March of 97, there's Andrea Faye Borehaven. There's no age given for her. In August of 1997, Helen May Hallmark. There's no age for her either. December of 1997 is Cynthia Felix. No age given. January of 98, there's Carrie Koski. February of 1998, there's Inga Monique Hall. She was 46. April of 1998, there's Sarah DeVries. November 20th of 1998, there's Angela Rebecca Jardine. January of 1999, there's Jacqueline Michelle McDonald. She was 23. December of 1999, there's Wendy Crawford. Also in December of 1999, there's Tiffany Drew. There was no month given, but in the year of 1999, Jennifer Lynn Firminger was killed. December of 2000, we have Deborah Lynn Jones. December of 2000, Dawn Teresa Cray. October 19th of 2001, there's Diane Rosemary Rock. She was 34. April 17th of 2001, there's Heather Kathleen Bottomley. She was 25. March of 2001, there's Patricia Rose Johnson. April of 2001, there's Heather Chinook. She was 30. And the last name we have is March 16th of 2001. That's Yvonne Marie Bowen. She was 34.
I think that's the longest list we've had so far.
So far, yeah.
And like I said, they found evidence of DNA from more
At
than
least
just
33.
these. So we know there's more out there. And like I said, God knows who they are. So we'll just say a prayer in general from them.
But yeah, I think that'll conclude this.
Well, I want to ask Zelda one thing.
Yes.
We was talking about the nurture nature thing. That's been bugging me, how Robert turned. I don't think David is innocent and everything, but what do you think the difference between him and David? Because they was in the same type of situation.
And David actually killed that 14-year-old too, and
with the truck.
Yeah,
So.
and his mom covered it up for him.
I think that's where the genetics and biology and things like that, the innate part comes in, because
The major
again,
part of that argument.
yeah, some people turn out to be, they put in these situations and they turn out to be good people. They break the cycle. They don't do certain things, and then other people do. So it's a mixture of both, and that's what psychologists and other scientists have really struggled to see the balance of, is which one, nature, nurture, which one has more impact. And so in psychology, we kind of say it's about 50-50, if not like 60-40. Like it's mostly genetics, but then you also have like a lot of the nature as well. In this case, I would say a lot of the environment. In this case, I would say it's mostly environment, but there was the genetic factor as well.
Yeah,
So there's a little more
you have to wonder about that too,
predisposition to it,
because
you think?
look at Jeffrey Dahmer's little brother.
Yeah, same thing.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah, I mean, he never did anything of that sort. And
you mentioned that we could do a case on nature versus nurture. We're doing one right now. Really, we could easily do one nature versus nurture. But I want Zelda back for that one when we do that.
Okay, yeah, when we do
Oh, of
nature and
course.
nurture,
I'd be happy to
if you want
come
to be in on it, yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
of course, I'd be happy to come back.
Mhm. It may. I don't know when we'll do it, but we'll definitely. I think that'll be a good show.
So that would be a fascinating one.
Well, we told Mr. Rick that we'd wrap up at 9 because he's got a show coming up after us. So I think, Zelda, if you want to introduce yourself and tell everybody where you can be found on Twitter or whatnot, please go ahead and take a few minutes to do it.
Okay. Sorry about that, Daniel. Hi, my name is Zelda Aurora Gabriel. You can find me at Zelda A Gabriel on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it. And yeah, so I'm really into the psychological stuff and all this kind of stuff. I'm less into the true crime, but into the clinical stuff and politics, and I'm in a lot of different stuff. So you can find me there.
Yeah, I know. That's almost, I think, where me and you kind of first connected was actually on the psychology of all this. Because to me, it's not the sensationalism of it. It's, like I said in the Jeffrey Dahmer episode a couple of weeks ago, it's more the why do these people do these things? Like, what drives a person to do this? So it's the psychology, the criminal psychology, the forensics of it that
Yes.
they get me every time. But I say she is Zelda A. Gabriel on X. I'm Bumpstock Barbie. You can find me on X. I am just Laura W. on Twitchy. You can find all my writings
All
and
your
everything
writing.
there too.
I'm probably the least of us. I'm just on X as Bumpstock Ken.
Bumpstock Barbie and Bumpstock Ken.
That's
So it's
right.
easy to remember.
And I know Mr. Rick's in the background there, making everything run smoothly. So if
I'm
you
about to say,
want
come on, Rick.
to say something, now's your time, sir.
Well, you can follow along with me at RadioX73 on most social media platforms. I'll be up here in a second with our very own Amish Ordnance J. Packard doing the Rick and Orty show. I'm live every Monday through Friday, except for the first Monday of the month, 3 p.m., 5 p.m. Eastern, right here on KLRNRadio.com doing the Rick Robinson show. For everything else, check the schedule. You can also find me as a regular contributor on Twitchy.com, theloftusparty.com, and misfitspolitics.com. And I'm also the executive producer of the Loftus Party podcast, which just dropped yesterday, I think. Shit, all the days are running together, but I'm pretty sure, yeah, it dropped yesterday because he was on Gutfield yesterday too.
I swear, you got that like down pat.
Well, I do it like 20 episodes a week. Anyway.
So everybody stay on and listen. Give the show. It's good. It's fun. And
I say go to our actual show page on X now at Talk Murder to Me with the number 2. Give us like any cases you want to hear us discuss or any topics you want us to discuss. Any questions from this one? I'll be on from here till when I go to bed. So
by the way, this is a bit of behind the scenes stuff, but since you guys are already talking about wanting to expand, if you want to do weekly, whether it's an hour or 2 hour, we could always do Friday starting at 10 p.m. Eastern and then run to either 11 or midnight. Or if you want to do bi-weekly and do 2 hours, you can always take the Saturday nights that Orty and I aren't doing juxtaposition and then run from 9 to 11.
Oh, absolutely. We'll definitely talk with you about that.
Well, once football starts, we won't be able to do Fridays.
Yeah, Friday nights will be rough.
But the Saturday, I don't know.
I mean, like I said, we could always do Saturdays. Now, keep in mind that's Eastern time, so it would start at it would start 10 Eastern and run to midnight, but it's 9 to 11 for us that live in the actual time zone that counts.
Yeah, the one God intended.
God's time zone.
Indeed.
I say that almost every show. Anyway, so and then Orty, of course, lives in the past, so he doesn't count.
Yeah.
He uses a sundial for his time.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank y'all for listening.
Thank you so much.
It. And
I
thank
enjoyed
you
being
for
on
joining
here.
us.
Yeah, we're going to have you back on for sure, Zelda, because I definitely want to go more into the nature nurture thing with you.
Yeah, I enjoyed being here.
All right, folks, that's going to do it for Talk Murder to Me. Stay tuned. Ordnance Packard and I are up next. And I'll be back tomorrow because I kind of live here.
She'll fucking kill you. She wins every fight. She's gonna rock your shit by the end of the night. And the only advantage that a killer has is they think they have the right. I listen to a lot of true